The silence was the heaviest thing Elara had ever known. It filled her small, clapboard house on the edge of the misty Washington woods, a physical weight pressing down on her lungs, on her heart, on the very air she tried to breathe. It had been 3 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days since the car crash that had taken Liam, and the silence was a more constant companion than her own grief, which came in violent, unpredictable waves. Today it was a dull, throbbing ache. She stood at the kitchen sink, her hands submerged in lukewarm water, staring out at the dense wall of Douglas firs and western hemlocks, their branches dripping with a recent, gentle rain. The world outside was lush and alive, a vibrant, breathing entity that seemed to mock the sterile death inside her home. Liam's coffee mug, the one with the chipped rim that said, "World's okayest husband," still sat on the counter. His jacket was still slung over the back of the dining chair. She couldn't bring herself to move them. To do so would be an act of finality, a declaration to the universe that he was truly, irrevocably gone. And she wasn't ready for that. She would never be ready. A sharp knock at the door shattered the silence, making her jump. Her heart, a sluggish, wounded thing, hammered against her ribs. No one came out here anymore. Her friends had stopped trying, their well-meaning platitudes drying up in the face of her impenetrable sorrow. It was probably the mailman with a package she hadn't ordered. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and went to the door, pulling it open to reveal not the mailman, but her older sister, Maeve. Maeve, with her sensible raincoat, her concerned eyes, and a casserole dish held in her hands like a shield. "Don't say you're not hungry," Maeve said by way of greeting, stepping inside without an invitation. She filled the small entryway with her presence, her energy a stark contrast to the stagnant air. "You've lost more weight, Elara. You're fading away." "I'm fine, Maeve," Elara said, her voice hoarse from disuse. It was a lie so transparent, it was almost insulting. Maeve set the casserole on the table and turned, her gaze sweeping over the room, taking in the dust on the TV, the unopened mail piled high, the palpable aura of neglect. Her eyes lingered on Liam's jacket. "You can't live like this, honey. It's not healthy. It's a shrine, not a home." Her voice was soft but firm. "You need to start clearing some of his things. Not all at once. Just a little. For your own sanity." Elara crossed her arms, a defensive gesture. "I'm not ready." "He's not coming back, Elara." The words, though spoken gently, landed like physical blows. They were the truth she fought against every waking moment. The conversation that followed was a well-worn path of argument and concern, ending with Maeve leaving, frustrated and worried, after extracting a promise that Elara would at least eat the casserole. The silence descended once more, thicker and more oppressive than before. "He's not coming back." That night, the grief didn't come as a wave. It was a riptide, pulling her under until she was gasping, sobbing into Liam's pillow, which had long since lost its scent. The emptiness was a void inside her, a black hole consuming everything she was. In the depths of that despair, a memory, long buried and feverish, surfaced. Her grandmother, not the sweet, cookie-baking grandmother of her cousin's memories, but the one from her childhood summers in rural Ireland, the one the locals whispered about, the one who spoke of things that grew in the shadows and knew the properties of plants that weren't in any medical book. Before she died, she had pressed a small, leather-bound journal into Elara's teenage hands. "For when the world becomes too much to bear alone, Emo Stwarin," she had whispered, her eyes clouded with age and secrets. "But remember, every binding goes 2 ways. What you call must answer, and a thing that answers from the grave is never the thing that was buried." Elara had dismissed it as her grandmother's eccentricity. She was a botanist, a scientist. She dealt in empirical data, not folklore. But now, drowning in a sea of grief, science had failed her. Logic had failed her. All that was left was the desperate, clawing need to see Liam again, to hear his voice, to feel his touch. She scrambled into the attic, the dust motes dancing like spirits in the beam of her flashlight. She found the old trunk under a sheet, filled with the relics of a past life. And there, at the bottom, was the journal. The leather was cracked, the pages brittle and filled with her grandmother's tight, looping script. It was a compendium of local myths, herbal remedies, and, towards the back, darker things. Rituals. Her heart thundered in her chest as she read by the dim light. And there it was. And single lays and scath, the binding to the shadow. A ritual to call a soul back from the veil. It required personal items of the deceased, a lock of hair, a drop of blood from the summoner, and to be performed at the witching hour in a place of power, a threshold between worlds. The old woods behind her house, her grandmother had once written, were such a place, laced with ancient ley lines. It was madness, superstition, but the pain in her chest overrode all reason. The warning on the following page, written in bold, frantic letters, barely registered, beware. The love that calls a soul back may not be the love that returns. The grave changes a man. It hollows him. What comes back wears a familiar face, but the eyes are windows to a different sky. She didn't care. If it was a ghost, a shade, a mere echo, it would be more than the nothing she had now. The next night was moonless and cold. Elara stood in a small clearing deep in the woods, a place where the trees grew so close their branches knitted a canopy that blocked out the sky. She had laid out Liam's favorite watch, the wedding band he never took off, and a photograph of them both, laughing on a beach in Oregon. Her hands trembled as she pricked her finger with a sterilized needle, letting a single, dark drop of blood fall onto the photograph, smearing their smiling faces. She began to read the words from the journal, the old Gaelic syllables feeling foreign and heavy on her tongue. The air grew still. The usual nocturnal sounds of the forest, the crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, ceased abruptly, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The wind died. The only sound was her own shaky voice, reciting the forbidden invocation. A deep cold seeped up from the ground, chilling her to the bone. The candle she had brought guttered, its flames stretching into a thin, unnatural blue ribbon. The shadows around the edge of the clearing began to writhe and coalesce, pulling away from the trees and pooling in the center of the ritual space. They deepened, solidified, and took shape. A figure emerged from the darkness. It was Liam. He stood there, wearing the same suit he'd been buried in, his dark hair slightly mussed, just the way she remembered. For a glorious, heart-stopping second, it was him. It was really him. "Liam," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, a sob of pure, unadulterated joy catching in her throat. He took a step forward into the faint light of the blue candle. His face was pale, too pale, and his eyes, his warm, brown eyes that used to crinkle at the corners when he laughed, were now the color of a frozen, starless night. They held no warmth, no recognition, only a deep, unsettling void. He smiled, but it didn't reach those cold eyes. It was a possessive, triumphant curve of the lips. "Elara," he said, and his voice was a hollow echo of the one she loved, a sound that seemed to come from a great distance. "You called. I am here." He reached out a hand, and his skin, when it brushed against hers, was icy cold. The first few days were a blur of disbelieving euphoria. He was here. He was solid. He was in her house, walking through her halls, a miracle made flesh. Elara floated through the hours, her grief replaced by a frantic, desperate joy. She cooked his favorite meals. She played the music they used to dance to. She talked and talked, pouring out all the words she had stored up for 3 months. Liam listened. He was quiet, reserved. He answered her questions with short, simple sentences. He didn't ask any of his own. He didn't touch her unless she initiated it. And when he did, his hands were always cold, his embrace stiff. She chalked it up to the trauma of whatever he had been through. Of course he would be different. He had died. It was a miracle he was here at all. She ignored the small, cold knot of doubt forming in her stomach. He never ate. He would sit with her, push the food around his plate, but nothing ever passed his lips. He never slept. She would wake in the middle of the night to find him standing by the window, staring out into the dark woods, perfectly still for hours on end. "Don't you need to rest?" she asked him one morning, her voice trembling slightly. He turned those dark, empty eyes on her. "I have rested enough," he said, his tone flat. "The grave is a quiet place." A shiver traced its way down her spine. A week after his return, the first body was found. A young hiker, mauled in the woods not 5 miles from their home. The news report was grim, the anchor using words like animal attack and unprecedented violence. The sheriff, a pragmatic man named Miller, was quoted as saying the scene didn't look right. "No bear I know of just takes pieces," he'd said, his face grim on the evening news. That night, Elara noticed a dark, almost soil-like stain on the cuff of Liam's shirt, the modern, casual clothes she had bought to replace his burial suit. When she asked about it, he simply looked at his sleeve, then back at her. "I was in the garden," he said. "The soil is rich there." But she hadn't seen him in the garden, and the stain looked more like dry blood than dirt. The possessive behavior started subtly. He didn't like her going into town. When her phone rang, he would ask, "Who is that?" with an edge to his voice that was new, sharp as a blade. Once, the mailman, a friendly man in his 50s, lingered at the door for a moment too long, asking if she was okay. After he left, Liam had paced the living room like a caged animal. "He looks at you," Liam had hissed, his voice low and guttural. "He wants what is mine." "Liam, he's just being kind," Elara protested, a genuine fear beginning to bloom in her chest for the first time. This wasn't her husband. Her Liam had been generous, trusting, his love a warm, open space. This was something else. This love was a cage. "You are mine, Elara," he said, stopping his pacing to stand directly in front of her. He cupped her face, his touch like ice. "You call me back. You bound me to you. We are one now. No one will ever come between us again." She was too terrified to pull away. The second murder happened 2 nights later. A local fisherman pulled from the river near the old logging road. The official cause of death was drowning, but the unofficial word, whispered at the grocery store and reported in hushed tones on the local radio, was that his heart was missing, torn from his chest. Elara felt a cold certainty crystallize within her. She remembered the warning in her grandmother's journal. What comes back wears a familiar face. She looked at Liam, who was sitting in Liam's favorite armchair, perfectly still, staring at the blank television screen as if he could see things playing out there that she could not. She had to know. She waited until he was in his trance-like state by the window that night. Silently, she slipped out of bed and went to the closet where his burial suit was stored in a plastic bag. She had kept it a morbid keepsake. The suit was clean, neatly folded by the funeral home. But the shoes, she had forgotten about the shoes. They were caked in mud, and tangled in the deep treads of the soles were several small, dark leaves and a twig from a specific bush that only grew near the bend in the river where the fisherman's body was found. Her blood ran cold. She stumbled back into the living room, her breath catching in her throat. He was no longer by the window. He was standing right behind her. "What are you doing, Elara?" he asked. His voice was dangerously calm. "The fisherman, the hiker," she stammered, backing away. "Liam, what have you done?" The smile that spread across his face was a horrifying mockery of his former warmth. It was all teeth and predatory satisfaction. "They were a shadow," he whispered, stepping toward her. "A flicker in the corner of my eye. They were not real. Not like us. We are bound, my love. Their light was weak. I was hungry. I needed their substance to remain here, with you, to become more solid, more real." He was feeding on them, on their life, their vitality, whatever essence made them human. He was using their deaths to anchor himself to her world. "You're a monster," she breathed, her back hitting the wall. The smile vanished. His face became a mask of cold, ancient fury. "I am what you made me," he snarled, the hollow voice finally filling with emotion, a bottomless, terrifying rage. "You reached into the silence, and you pulled me back. You wanted me. You cannot undo this, Elara. The binding is eternal. You are mine, and I am yours, until the stars themselves grow cold and die. He grabbed her wrist, his grip like iron, cold and unyielding. Do not try to leave me. There is nowhere you can go that I will not find you. You are the anchor. You are the tether. And if you try to break it, he leaned in close, his frozen breath ghosting across her cheek. The void I will create in your world will make your previous grief feel like a summer breeze. The next week was a prison sentence. Elara moved through the house like a ghost herself, her every move monitored by the thing wearing her husband's face. The love she had felt had curdled into a thick, cloying fear. The house was no longer a shrine to Liam. It was a tomb for her, and she was its sole, living occupant. He was gone for longer periods now, always at night. She would lie in bed, listening, her heart pounding, waiting for the sound of the back door sliding open. He would return quieter, more substantial. The icy cold of his skin would have receded slightly, replaced by a dreadful, simulated warmth. He was growing stronger, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her soul, that another person had died to fuel that strength. She had to do something. She couldn't go to the police. What would she say? My dead husband, whom I illegally resurrected using a forbidden ritual from my witch grandmother's journal, is the serial killer you're looking for. They would lock her away, and Liam, the thing that was Liam, would simply come for her. Her only hope was the journal. There had to be something in it, an undo button, a counterspell. She waited for a day when he was in one of his deep, day-long stupors, sitting motionless in the chair, his eyes fixed on some distant, unseen point. She crept into the attic and retrieved the book, her hands shaking so badly she could barely turn the pages. She skipped past the rituals of calling and focused on the sections on banishment, on protection, on severing ties. Most of it required ingredients she didn't have or conditions she couldn't meet. A full solar eclipse, the heartwood of a 1,000-year-old oak. Her hope began to fade, the pages blurring through her tears. Then, near the very end, on a page that was almost torn out, she found it. Scaoiled in fastu, the unbinding. It was not a simple reversal. The text warned it was perilous, a battle of wills against a shadow that was now part of the physical world. It required 3 things. The object that bound the spirit most strongly to this plane, a personal item of great significance to the summoner that represented their will to be free, and a source of pure, living light to act as a weapon and a guide. The binding object was easy, the photograph with her blood on it, which he kept folded in his pocket, close to him at all times. The source of light was trickier, but she had an old, heavy silver locket that had been her grandmother's. It wasn't a weapon, but it was pure. Her will to be free, that was the hardest part. It meant truly, in her heart, letting go of Liam, accepting that he was gone. She looked at the monster in her living room and knew she had no other choice. Gathering the items was a dangerous game. She managed to find a large, polished piece of quartz in Liam's old rock-collecting box. It felt clean, vibrant, alive. She took her grandmother's locket from her jewelry box. Now, she needed the photograph. Her chance came on a stormy night. The wind howled around the house, and the rain lashed against the windows. The thing that was Liam seemed agitated by the storm, pacing and muttering. In a moment of frustration, he slammed his fist against the wall, and the photograph fell from his pocket, fluttering to the floor near the fireplace. He didn't seem to notice, his attention consumed by the raging weather outside. Elara's heart leapt into her throat. This was it. She had to act now. She retrieved the quartz and the locket, hiding them in the pockets of her cardigan. She crept towards the photograph, her eyes fixed on his back. Just as her fingers brushed against the paper, he went perfectly still. "What are you doing, Elara?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft. He turned slowly. His eyes were no longer just empty. They swirled with a darkness that seemed to drink the very light from the room. She snatched the photograph and scrambled backward. "I'm sending you back," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "You are not my husband." A roar of pure, undiluted hatred erupted from him, a sound that was not human, not animal, but the shriek of tearing reality. The windows in the living room shattered inward. "I am his love," he bellowed, his form flickering, the shadows in the room stretching towards him, clinging to him like a second skin. "I am his rage. I am everything he felt for you, made manifest. You cannot unmake me." He lunged for her. Elara screamed and threw the piece of quartz. It was a desperate, clumsy throw, but as it flew through the air, it seemed to catch the flickering light from the fireplace, flashing with a sudden, brilliant white light. The thing that was Liam recoiled, hissing, a wisp of smoke rising from where the light had touched his arm. It worked. The light hurt him. She turned and ran, not for the door. He would be there before her, but for the kitchen. He was on her in an instant, his cold hands closing around her throat from behind, lifting her off the ground. She clawed at his hands, her vision spotting. "We are bound," he snarled at her ear. "In life and in death. You are mine." Gasping for air, she fumbled in her pocket, her fingers closing around her grandmother's locket. With her last ounce of strength, she swung her arm back, pressing the silver locket against his face. A sizzling sound filled the air like meat on a grill. He screamed, a sound of genuine agony, and dropped her. She fell to the floor, choking, crawling away. She looked back. A perfect, locket-shaped burn was seared into his cheek, the skin around it blackened and oozing a black, tar-like substance. He stared at her, his hand touching the wound, a look of utter betrayal and madness on his face. "You burned me." This was her moment. The storm raged. The thing that was her husband, wounded and furious, stood between her and the door. She had the photograph. She had the locket. She had her will to be free. She began to recite the words of the unbinding, the old Gaelic phrases torn from her throat. "Sceo illimus and single SEO. I break this binding." He howled and charged again, but he was slower now, weakened by the silver and the light. She held the locket out like a shield, and he flinched back. Filid ar anskad, returned to the shadow. The air began to hum, the same way it had in the clearing. The shadows in the kitchen writhed, but this time they were being pulled towards him, sucking into his form, making him darker, more distorted, less human. "Ludi warrant sail," si chain and boss. "With the light of life, I banish this death." She threw the bloodied photograph into the fireplace. The flames, starved for air in the storm-racked room, hesitated for a moment before leaping upon it, consuming their smiling faces, her drop of blood, the very essence of the spell. The thing that was Liam let out a final, deafening shriek, a chorus of 1,000 lost voices. His body began to unravel, the shadows that composed him peeling away like layers of burnt paper, scattering into the howling wind that whipped through the broken windows. For a fleeting second, amidst the dissolving darkness, she saw him. Not the monster, but Liam. Her Liam. His eyes were warm and brown again, filled with a profound sadness and an immense, forgiving love. He looked at her, and his lips formed a single, silent word. "Goodbye." And then he was gone. The wind died down as suddenly as it had begun. The only sounds were the sputtering of the rain through the broken window and the crackle of the fire consuming the last of the photograph. Elara collapsed onto the cold kitchen floor, sobbing, not from grief or fear, but from a vast, hollow, exhausted relief. The official story was a mess. A freak storm, a break-in, a tragic accident. Sheriff Miller found Elara in shock, the house in disarray. There was no body, no evidence of Liam, only the broken windows and the lingering, inexplicable scent of ozone and cold earth. The serial murders, as abruptly as they had started, stopped. The case grew cold, filed away with other strange, unsolved occurrences in the Pacific Northwest. Elara sold the house. She moved to a small apartment in a bright, noisy city hundreds of miles away. She went to therapy. She slowly began to rebuild the pieces of her life, a mosaic forever missing its central tile. She never spoke of the ritual, of the thing that wore Liam's face, of the final, loving look in his eyes as he faded. Some truths were too terrible, too beautiful to be shared. A year later, on a bright autumn day, she visited a quiet coastline, a place they had always talked about going. She wore her grandmother's locket, now permanently fastened. She stood on the cliff edge, the wind tugging at her hair, and scattered a handful of wildflower seeds into the air, forgiveness and remembrance, and finally, letting go. She had learned that love was not a chain, and that grief was not a place to live. It was a passage, a river to be crossed. And on the other side, even with the scars, there could be peace. She had bound a shadow, and in unbinding it, she had finally set herself free.